Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Four Female Founders podcast series. I am your host, Sarah Bundy. And today we have a very special guest with us. We have Dr. Gabrielle, who is a solar energy Ph.D. graduate from the University of Oxford, also the co-founder of Greenr, a sustainability as a service organization, helping companies to measure and reduce their environmental impact using integrated expense systems and AI, along with a gamified app that transforms employees into sustainability champions. Hello, Dr. Gabrielle, and welcome to the show.
Hi, nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Anytime. Well, you know what? I loved our conversation when we first got to meet, and I was thrilled that you said yes to actually talking to us today about the things that we're going to talk about. You're very unique. You have an incredible background. You're actually a world record holder as well. And I think probably the best way to get started is for you to tell us a little bit about Greenr, your company Greenr that you co-founded, and how you ended up getting into sustainability as a business.
Yeah, absolutely. What a background. It's always funny when people just lay out your life in like a couple of sentences. It always feels like, did I really do that? But yeah. Yes, so essentially Greenr, we started in 2020 and it is, as you said, a sustainability as a service platform. So we help companies measure their carbon footprint if they don't have any sort of sustainability policy at all. They don't even know where to start. We have a software that plugs into a company's expense system. And then we download all expenses that your company has done over the last 12 months. And then we allocate a carbon footprint to each expense. And then you can easily generate a carbon report from it. So the idea is to provide an alternative to a sustainability consultants for a smaller company. So like an SME, SMB that may not afford to hire, like a full sustainability team. So that's the idea. And then in terms of our other product and what makes us different, the motivation for making Greenr in the first place was to help as many people as possible, individual people, calculate and reduce their carbon footprint. There's loads of different goals, with the different Paris Agreement and all of the COP conferences that we have every year. We always say, or the governments always tell us we need to reduce our carbon footprint. But what I found is that actually less than 0.5% of the world population even know what their footprint is. And then I always say, everybody always says, the first step to managing any problem is to measure it. And so that was the idea to make Greenr in the first place, was just to create an app and say, we've got an app to get more fit or to lose weight and to track how much energy your washing machine uses, but we don't even know what our footprint is. And so that's what Greenr was in its infancy, just an app, a carbon coach to say, this is your footprint and this is how you can reduce it. And now we've added this app and we use it for employees and we get employees to reduce their footprint. And all of that ties into the company overall software to reduce the company footprint. And that's what we do.
Cool. Let's talk a little bit about what a carbon footprint actually means, because I think maybe one of the reasons why a lot of people don't measure it is they're not actually sure what impact they're having. They don't know why it's important. They don't know what the definitions are. Tell us a little bit about what carbon footprint means, please,
Yeah.
and why it is important for the world today.
Yeah, good question. I mean, I have so many bugbears with carbon footprint as a term, to be honest. We have to use it because that's what people do, but I find it so many steps removed from what actually matters. Like if we could measure our environmental impact in, if everybody in the world did as you did, the world would be 10 degrees warmer, then you'd be like, oh, I understand that metric. But tons of carbon is quite, yeah, it's hard to grasp essentially. But essentially, a carbon footprint is the emissions that are created of greenhouse gas emissions that are created from an activity, a business, a person living for a year, or an event, or any food that gets produced, etc. So carbon footprint can be associated with everything. What is really interesting, and the reason why we use carbon footprint is actually kind of wrong in its definition. So it should be carbon dioxide footprint, first of all. And actually, even more than that, it should be carbon dioxide equivalent footprint, but that's kind of a mouthful. So we just say carbon. But essentially, carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, which is one of the gases in our atmosphere that essentially covers the earth like a blanket. And if you put more and more greenhouse gases, then the radiation, so the earth heats up during the day when there's sun on it, and then at night it's supposed to go back, the radiation is supposed to go back into space. But if you put more and more gases, there's more and more blankets, therefore the earth warms up with time. In terms of greenhouse gases, you've got many greenhouse gases, not just carbon dioxide. That's just the most prevalent one. But you have water vapor as a greenhouse gas, you have methane, nitrous oxide. So there's loads of different gases. But in order to make it easier, rather than say, hey, last year my footprint was 10 tons of CO2, 1 ton of methane, 3 tons of nitrous oxide, which would be like really annoying, we've normalized everything back down to carbon dioxide through its global warming potential. And essentially, we look at all the gases and we say, okay, if we take CO2, carbon dioxide, as global warming potential 1, so how good it is at warming the earth, we look at all the other gases related to that. So if you take methane, methane is 84 times as good or as bad at warming the earth than CO2. So 1 ton of CO2 is equivalent to 84 tons of methane, which is why beef and different animals that release a lot of methane, and I won't go into the details, they're worse for the planet because they release methane, which is 84 times worse than CO2. So that's essentially how it works, and that's what your carbon footprint is.
Okay, so how does Greenr measure that? Down to the employee level or down to the company level?
Yeah, and so essentially what we do, in order to measure the carbon footprint of a person or a company, there are two ways, and there are two methodologies, and they go hand in hand, and we actually use both in a hybrid approach. So the first step, or the first approach, is called a spend-based approach. We'll say, okay, assuming you've spent $10 on a meal, either as a company or as a person, we know that on average, I don't know, each meal emits 10 kilos of CO2, and an average meal costs $20. So if you spend $10, then you've emitted 5 kilos of CO2. That's essentially how it works. And those databases are huge. There are models that are approved by the government. The government gives us that data every year, so we're able to do that. Now, that spend base, you can see it's great because it's very easy to calculate. So we just take your expenses, which as a company you have to have more or less. And so we're able to quickly find a carbon footprint, but it's not very accurate because if you have a vegetarian meal versus a meat containing meal, then obviously the carbon footprint would be different, but in your bills, you're not going to say vegetarian meal. And so the way that we counteract that is by the second methodology, which is called activity based. And an activity based is where instead of saying how much you spent on something, you'll say, this is what I've done. So instead of saying I spent $600 on a flight, you say, no, I booked a flight to London. And so that's more accurate, but it's also more prone to errors and it's a lot more user intensive. And so by using our gamified app, we're able to have employees play and compete against their colleagues to have the lowest footprint. But they give us all that data saying, I took 6 flights, I go to work 3 days a week, and all these kind of things. And so you're able to essentially have both the activity based and the spend based data, put it together so that you have an accurate carbon footprint at the end.
That's so cool. And for those who are listening in and not viewing this video format, I'm actually sharing Dr. Gabrielle's Greenr website right now, and we're taking a look at what the app looks like. It is beautifully designed. The user interface looks gorgeous. Super user-friendly QR codes. It is gamified. There's all kinds of colorful graphs and charts. And I think it's amazing that individuals and companies can actually now know what their impact is on the world, but it's nice to actually have some information about your own, way of living. A lot of people just don't know; they don't have the tools to do it. And to your point, you've co-founded and created a company where it allows people to be able to do that successfully. You do talk a little bit about how you use integrated expense systems and AI in combination to help companies understand what that even is and how individual consumers and people who are eating or having certain lifestyles are contributing to that. So how do you integrate expense systems and AI to get information that you need to make it as accurate as possible?
Yeah, for sure. So the way that we integrate AI is in the form of NLP, which is natural language processing. So when you get expenses from a company, it will be a big CSV file, so a big Excel spreadsheet, essentially. That'll tell me every single transaction that you've done as a business, and then probably the supplier, and then how much it was, how much you spent on it, and then the date. And then how do I actually allocate a carbon footprint for that transaction? I need to know what that transaction was. So some accountancy systems, so we integrate with different systems like Xero, QuickBooks, Sage, Oracle, will give us some categories. So they'll say this was a business travel, this was a computer expense, for example. But actually, if I'm looking at my assumptions and my carbon footprint per dollar spent, going back to that, it's very important to have as precise categories as possible. So we use natural language processing to look at the string, so the data that we get from the transaction. So that's usually the name of it and the supplier. And then we use NLP, which is an AI model that allocates that to a made category that we've done. So we say, okay, instead of looking at business travel, which is what it was before, and then you have an overall carbon footprint for that, we'll say within business travel, you should have metro, taxis, train, planes, and petrol reimbursement, and tell me exactly what it is so that I can know precisely what the carbon footprint is. So that's step one of how we integrate AI. And then going further from that, now that we have very accurate categories, we're able to say, okay, so then looking at your business travel again, I could see that in the UK, for example, you took 12 flights last year from London to Edinburgh, which is categorized as a national flight. And I know that there are trains that can do that same journey. So therefore, had you taken a train for those 12 flights, you would have saved 12 tons of CO2 equivalent last year, which is 10% of your overall footprint. So we're actually able to say, this is your footprint and this is what you need to do immediately without them saying like, oh my God, now what do I do? We're able to actually give those solutions using AI.
So it's more actionable and people can actually put together a plan for improvement
100%.
using
Yeah.
Greenr as a solution. That's awesome.
Mhm.
What are some of the benefits of companies actually using this as a solution, aside from obviously environmental responsibility? Do you find that companies, increase their employee retention? Is it customer engagement? Do they have increased conversion rates with winning buyers because they're being environmentally responsible? Like, what are the benefits to companies who actually use this?
Yeah, absolutely. So the marketing side of things and the customer attraction and also employee retention side of things is huge. So if you look, there's been a lot of surveys for millennials and Gen Zs. So a lot of Gen Zs are coming into the workforce now and they're very passionate about the climate. And actually across those age groups, 75% of employees would pick a sustainability focused job over another job. So if you can make your company a green company by having an employee engagement program, by having a sustainability policy, you really open the door to having way more talented people want to stay and come to your company. That's number one. Number two, 55% of consumers in the UK and Europe are willing to pay more to have a sustainable product. So again, if you can make your business and your supply chain a greener one or a sustainable one, you can really improve your revenue margins and actually acquire a lot more customers. And then the last one is just brand loyalty, right? So in terms, if you can show your consumer, your customer, as well as your employees that you actually care not only about them, about profit, but also about planet, then you will gain a lot more customer loyalty, which is better in the long run. And I have my favorite quote from one of our friends. So through work, one of my favorite thing about this job is that I get to meet amazing people all the time. And I met this woman called Nicole, who is actually a NASA astronaut, and she wrote a book which I recommend to everybody that's interested in space and sustainability, which is called Back to Earth. And she said, everybody cares about lines all the time, profit lines, lines of your countries, where your lawn stops and the neighbor's stops and all these lines. But actually the only line that matters is a thin blue line that protects us from the deadly vacuum of space, which is amazing. And which is so true. And so I think if you can really bring that into your company policy and say, this is what we care about, we don't just care about profit lines, then you just buy yourself so many customers. Speaking of marketing, one of my favorite surveys, happened last year. They interviewed hundreds of thousands of people all across the world, especially in the US, and they said, which company or organization do you trust most in the world? You can choose the government, you can choose hospitals, you can choose charities, you can choose consumer products, anything. And with a resounding, this is who we trust more, it was Patagonia, which I think is amazing. It's like consumer, they make jackets, but people were like, we trust them to know what to do and that they're not lying to us. And they're the most sustainable brand that we have. So I thought it was amazing.
That's amazing. So Patagonia is a client of yours today?
No, we wish. Patagonia, if you can.
They're committed to sustainability through their own work. So
yeah, exactly.
Patagonia, if you're listening to this, please give Dr. Gabrielle a call.
Exactly. Sponsor us, please. No, so they were one of the pioneers. Yvon Chouinard, their founder, was one of the pioneers in sustainability. And just, during Black Friday, they shut down their website and they're like, do not buy our products during Black Friday. We will not have sales because we don't believe in fast fashion and you should only buy stuff if you need it. Which I think
I love that. Yeah, I've seen actually a lot of their campaigns, but also them following through, putting their money where their mouth is to say,
Absolutely.
guys, like, we're here for a reason. Here's our purpose, and we
Cool.
act the way that we speak too. So with you on that one, and it's interesting because if you think about the benefit of employee retention, attracting talent, especially in the younger generations, thinking about customer acquisition, thinking about brand loyalty, all of those things together, certainly positively impact bottom line. But to your point, with the book that you recommended and your friend who's an astronaut, the sustainability of humans and life on Earth is
Yes,
the bigger underlying purpose of all of this, right?
100%.
So,
Let's think
so
long term, guys. Yeah.
yeah. So I think that, if you're looking at bottom line and you're looking at how to operate your company in a way that is attractive to people, Greenr
Hmm.
can support that. All of the efforts and sustainability supports that.
Hmm.
But we also need longevity as a species and as a planet, and putting effort and investments into things like this will help us do that collectively
100%.
as a human race. So I think it's wonderful what you've created. Let's take a step back really quickly, Dr. Gabrielle. I would love to hear about your experience at Oxford when you got your PhD, because you studied something really interesting. And I know that you broke some world records on some things too. So could you tell us a little bit about your experience at Oxford, which is very
Yeah.
impressive in itself, what you studied and what you came to actually learn while you were there?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, going to Oxford was definitely a huge lifelong dream of mine. I actually applied as an undergraduate to do my bachelor's there, and I didn't get in, which was probably my first ever big failure. You know, when you're a kid and you're 17 and you think you're going to get in, and then you just don't, and it's like, wow, now what do I do? And so that was a lot of learning for me, definitely. And I went to do my bachelor's, master's in mechanical engineering at another excellent university in London. But then I always had that itch, I was like, I just want to be there. It's the best university in the world. It has been for the last 6 years in a row. And it's just a place I want to be. And so I applied for my PhD, and I worked really hard, and I got in, and I wanted to stay within renewable energy. So when I did mechanical engineering, you learn about all types of energy, obviously. But then I had a big focus on renewables in my studies, and then I wanted to keep that on. And so when I applied at Oxford, I actually had two spots, which was really lucky, to do my PhD in two different groups. And one was offshore wind and one was solar. And to be completely honest, I was like, well, I'm going to have to do some field days. And some are they going to be in the North Sea in Scotland, and some are they going to be in Australia. So then I picked solar. And so that was actually the gist of it. But I'm really glad I did. It was really, really interesting. They're an amazing field. I think solar power has been one of the biggest success of modern time in terms of renewable energy. The price has gone down exponentially year on year on year. Now, if you look at the levelized cost of electricity, which is essentially a measure on if you take the existing grid, so if most of your energy or electricity is created using a gas power plant, and you're generating 1 megawatt of electricity, how much is that costing you to run? Versus if you install a new solar farm and you also generate 1 megawatt of electricity, how much does that cost, including setup and stuff? And so if you look at that's the levelized cost of electricity, LCOE. And if you look at those numbers in Southern Europe, so Southern France, Spain, and Italy, new solar is actually cheaper than existing gas power plants, which I think is incredible. And that's just because of the research that people have done. They've and also because of China. We often, people think different things about China and things like that, but actually in terms of solar development and solar research, they have been one of the pioneering nation, and have really, really pushed the needle and managed to make it so cheap that now we can just install them and run solar, which is amazing. And so that's what I was working on. I was working on silicon, which is one of the substrates or one of the materials that you use to make solar panels. It's a semiconductor material, which means it has a band gap in its chemical structure, which means that essentially when photons and electrons come from the sun, photons excite the electrons within the silicon material. The electrons get excited and then leave their band, essentially, more or less. And then they travel to two metal contacts that you put one at the top, one at the bottom, and then the electron will go around the circuit, and that creates electricity. That's essentially how it is. And so my job was to make the silicon material as pure as possible. So when you have an electron that's like excited and running around and trying to get to the metal contact, if it hits something, whether that's like a metal impurity or a little defect in the silicon, they'll fall back down to its gap. It'll be like, no, I don't want to go there. And so the idea is to introduce other things. So I introduced atomic hydrogen into the silicon to attach itself to all of the states, so that the electron goes by, and once there's atomic hydrogen in those areas, it doesn't see it, and then more electrons will go around, which improves the efficiency, which was the world record, which is what happened.
So you were the first person to do that.
No, so it was just like like tiny, tiny incremental improvements, and the world record has been broken like very quickly after. But yeah, essentially, it's you. I was talking about the electrons going round and being excited and living outside of their normal spot, and that's called a lifetime. And so the longest lifetime that the longer the lifetime, the more electricity you can convert. And so my job, or the world record, was the longest lifetime of that electron within the silicon.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
So
which
that's
was
what you
super fun.
accomplished while you were doing your PhD at Oxford University in London.
Yeah, exactly.
Amazing.
Um, yeah, and Oxford, as a university, I can't recommend it enough. It's just the most amazing place on earth. It's literally like Harry Potter. You get to go to dinner, you wear a cape, you have like different houses and loads of different customs, and it's just, yeah, it's a magical place. And if anyone can go, I would recommend it. It's the place to
That's
be.
amazing. Amazing. Well, I love that you got to see your dream come true, your 17-year-old self trying to get into
Yeah.
Oxford. You did it, you persevered and you pursued. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk to the other female founders that are listening to this podcast right now, because you've overcome a lot of incredible things. You've achieved a lot of incredible things through focus, through determination, through goal setting, through just like being hungry and interested in wanting to learn and discover new things.
Mm.
What's some advice that you would give to entrepreneurs and founders out there today who are trying to find their way, who are trying to overcome big challenges? What are 2 or 3 things that you would leave with them to think about and to execute on this year?
Yeah, interesting question. I think, yeah, a couple things. So the first one I would say is surround yourself. What I've found is that the entrepreneur and female founder community is incredibly helpful. I mean, this is a case, we just reached out, we're on the same sort of women database, and we thought, hey, let's have a chat. And people will generally say yes and want to help each other out. So surround yourself by amazing women and men, just amazing people in general. And don't be afraid to ask for help. I think that's one of our biggest, powers, is that you just don't be afraid to ask for help. Just say like, hey, I've never done this before. I'm super excited. Looking at your LinkedIn, you've been doing this for 15 years. Are you keen to have a chat? And you can just learn so much more by someone that's done it for 15 years than by making all the mistakes yourself. So yeah, number one, surround yourself. Number two is don't be afraid to do it your own way. I think, like we always mention breaking the status quo and all this kind of stuff. And it doesn't have to be huge. It just has to be little things that when you reach out to a client, potential client, instead of writing really corporate, you just put a smiley face in there, or just do it your own way. Let your personality shine through, and people will respond, favorably to that. I mean, unless you have a terrible personality, but hopefully you don't. And yeah, just let your personality shine through, and don't do it the way that everyone's always done it, because actually we're trying to disrupt the game. We're trying to have more female founders. We're trying to have more female in leadership roles. And so you have to make your own role. You can't just say, I want to take over this role that traditionally has been done by a man for the last 50 years and do it exactly as he did. You have to do it your own way. And that's what people will be looking out for. Yeah, and then the third one is also just don't burn out. I know that's really, like a classic, but I think, it can be very daunting. I think being a female founder, especially in the ages where you want to have children and all those kind of things. I don't have children myself yet, but I think there's a lot of work to be done there for like the society as a whole and the area as a whole to support women that are not just young or already have kids, like in between women that want to have kids and still remain in their jobs and their really fun jobs and career aspiring entrepreneurial roles. So I think look out for um, opportunities that you can do both. Essentially, don't if people tell you you can't do both, yes you can. Just say yeah I can, and just don't even tell them that you're doing both. Just do it and then tell them after.
I love that for sure. And I've been there. I've been there too, raising little kids and founding a company. For those of you who don't know, I actually founded my company, All Inclusive Marketing, when I was 6 months pregnant. And this first year was juggling babies and clients, and then I had another baby, and so now it's 2 babies and clients. And it is absolutely possible. And you're right. If you don't take care of yourself, there is burnout. There's risk of burnout. And you've got to be really careful about that too.
Mhm.
So surround yourself with great people, have great relationships, have a support system, do prioritize yourself too. You're important as well, right? All of you guys listening to this, you are important.
Yeah,
You guys take
absolutely.
care of yourself as well. So, what's next for you, Dr. Gabrielle?
Yeah, so definitely growing Greenr. We have some exciting partnerships in the works to really expand our reach. As I said at the beginning, the motivation for making Greenr in the first place was to try to help as many people as possible measure their footprint and reduce it. And so we're working on some exciting deals that can reach, hundreds of thousands of people, which should be really exciting. So working on that, always improving the product. It's difficult to make a, consumer facing app and business software with it's a small team that we have. So growing the team and just keeping up to date and hopefully making the planet greener. That's the plan.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank
If
you.
anybody wants to reach out to you and connect with you, what's the best way to contact you from here?
Yeah, definitely. So you can just go on our website and then just send an email to any of the emails listed on there. It's contact@greenr.com. And then someone from my team will redirect you to either myself or someone that's super relevant.
That's so great. And for those listening, it's Greenr, GREENR.com.
Yes. Classic startup, missing a letter.
Good. We can be as creative as we want to these days. Hey, all the usual URLs are gone. We can do whatever we like, right?
Absolutely.
Just redefining the rules for ourselves.
Definitely.
I love it. Well, thanks again for being here, and thanks for listening in, you guys. We will see you on the next show.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to the 4 Female Founders podcast series. If you enjoyed this episode, please go ahead and hit subscribe, like, or comment below so we can continue to support women in business by helping them thrive, not just survive. We'll see you on the next show.